What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com coming back at you today with kind of a transfer breakdown and a hypothetical fit with Texas. We're talking about the Georgia sophomore wide receiver, Adonai Mitchell, who submitted his paperwork to enter the transfer portal today. Got it in before the deadline. This was initially reported this afternoon by Dogs HQ, the Georgia On 3 site, later confirmed by multiple other outlets. But yeah, I wanted to talk about what Mitchell brings to the table, some likely destinations for him that were reported, and kind of what his game looks like, and as always, put some B-roll over this. So let's go ahead and start with some of the background and then the connections that he has, like some likely destinations, things like that, because that maybe will help provide some context here. Mitchell is initially he was initially a 4-star recruit out of Fort Bend, Austin in Texas. He spent, I believe it was his first 2 years of high school playing in Texas, and then wound up transferring out to a school in Antioch in Tennessee to play his final 2 years of high school ball. He was initially an Ole Miss commit, ends up signing with Georgia, and former UGA wide receivers coach Cortez Hankton, I believe Monken was one of the leaders in that recruitment as well, still the offensive coordinator at Georgia. And Mitchell was a guy that made a big splash right away at Georgia. We'll get into his game a little bit more later, but he was someone that, from what I remember, wasn't really expected to contribute in the way he did right away, knowing some of the depth that Georgia has in their receiving core. He was, I think, a little bit under-recruited because he was barely a 4-star, from what I remember in the 247 Sports Composite. I think he was outside of the top 350 in the 2021 class, so a little bit underrated in that regard. But some of the likely destinations that have been reported for him, obviously Texas, one of the reasons I'm doing this video. There were hints at him being connected to Texas for a little while now. My understanding is that he's got a newborn kid in kind of the Houston area. That's where he's initially from. So that could just get him closer to home. He was someone that, while he was getting recruited by SEC schools, and once he moved to Tennessee, that was the part of the country that he was in, SEC country, there was some Big 12 interest, schools within the state of Texas coming after him, and so the links to home, that makes sense. There were also reports talking about the USC Trojans as a potential destination for him. Those sound like the two likely destinations right now, but by my understanding, we're going to figure out more about any other schools that Mitchell could potentially consider here in the next couple of days. And at the site, we will keep you updated on all of that. Also link some of the coverage that we've done already in the description below. But anyway, so yeah, I guess to wrap up that part, I think Texas, USC would be the leaders out of the gates. Talked about a report today on the site that it's expected that he will visit Texas within the next week or so. I will keep up with that storyline as well, just to see if any visit dates actually get nailed down. As of the recording of this video on the evening of January 18th, I don't know of any visit that's confirmed yet, but again, we'll keep you updated there. So transition here, talk about, some of his game, what he brings to the table, what he did during his time at Georgia, and again, we're a Texas site, so ultimately how he could fit at Texas if that is where he lands, and why that makes sense. So, Mitchell was someone that, like I said, wasn't necessarily expected to be like a huge contributor right away. Georgia had a top 5 ranked recruiting class that he signed with for the 2021 cycle, and he just ended up being someone that really caught the attention of the media, the staff, his teammates, kind of right away when he enrolled at Georgia. During summer workouts, fall camp, my understanding is, I'm talking about the 2021 offseason, that he was kind of blowing some people away, just what he could do on the field physically, some of his route running ability, and some of the catches he was making in camp. And, from that perspective, if you're able to blow, the Georgia coaches and staff and teammates away in the weight room and on the field in camp as a freshman before you make your debut, that we're talking about Georgia here. That's really impressive. But he exploded onto the scene pretty much right away. Georgia, again, this is a team that, for the most part, relies on the ground game. At least last year, passing game wasn't as pronounced, wasn't as big of part of the offense. I'll do some research here to make sure that I'm correct on that just by the numbers. But Georgia's at least known as a team that will kind of gash you on the ground first, out physical you at the line of scrimmage, out muscle you, and for that reason, it was kind of surprising to see Mitchell come onto the scene the way he did last year. Talking about last year's in 2021. He ended up with north of 400 receiving yards, I believe 4 touchdown catches, most notably his 40-yard touchdown catch against Alabama in the national championship game. That was kind of the highlighting play and what everyone remembered heading into the 2022 season. Unfortunately, just throughout 2022, he dealt with I believe it was a high ankle sprain that limited him. He only ended up with like 9 catches for a little over 100 receiving yards this past season. He had a really, really solid debut in Georgia's blowout win against Oregon in the season opener. I believe it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 65 receiving yards and a touchdown. But after that, the ankle sprain kind of limited him until the postseason. We saw him make, I believe it was 1 catch in the national title game. I think he had a couple of catches against Ohio State, so he got back involved in the postseason. But again, I think the 2022 season for him is kind of a lost campaign, unfortunately, just due to injury issues. The good news, I think, on that front for Texas fans, if Texas is his ultimate destination out of the portal, is that high ankle sprain shouldn't be something that lingers around for too long. By my understanding, that's not really something that he's dealt with. It's not like he's had like recurring ankle injuries over the course of his football career. So, hopefully he just gets right and is healthy in 2023. A lot of what he was utilized for at Georgia was really encouraging if you're a Texas fan, or if USC is the destination, if you're a USC fan. He was, for a guy that's 6'4", 190 pounds, kind of your prototypical frame for a boundary receiver. He was someone that could do a little bit of everything, it seemed like. Just in terms of like his route running ability, his catch radius, where he was targeted on the field at Georgia. This past season, again, he only had a handful of targets. I think it was like a couple dozen on the season, not even that. But it was almost exact for each part of the field, short, intermediate, and deep passes. I think it was like, I want to say it was something like 30% in each area. And same thing with receptions. 2021 season was a little bit more frequent on the intermediate and short passes, but he was still utilizing the deep passing game. Around 20% of his targets as a true freshman were on deep balls. And if you watch his highlights, which again we'll run B-roll over this video so you can get a better look at his game, but you can see some of that, some of that route running versatility, and Georgia really being able to take advantage of his pretty large catch radius. He's got a long wingspan, pretty good vertical ability, and again that 6'4" frame. So it's not just on the boundary, and it's not just in one part of the field. He can work between the numbers. You can use him short, intermediate, deep. There wasn't a ton of usage for him in the screen game, so it's not like he was used everywhere. But I feel like if we'll talk about Texas, fit at Texas, if that's his destination a little bit later. But I'd say for the most part, he's someone you're going to get the ball probably at least 5 yards in front of the line of scrimmage. Due to his ability as a route runner, he's more of a, I've used this term a lot lately, but he's more of like a run and catch guy instead of catch and run. He only averaged somewhere in the ballpark of 2.5 or 3 yards after the catch during his time at Georgia. He is, while he does have some speed to him, which allows him to burn opposing defensive backs on the deep ball, which makes him really effective there, he's not the shiftiest guy in the open field. And so I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 3 or 4 missed tackles forced at Georgia. So Again, not the shiftiest guy in the world, but he can do some damage after the catch still. He's still got some burners on him. On here, his route versatility, kind of some of that long speed that he brings to the table, catch radius, those are all upsides that he brings. But he's still someone that can serve as a traditional boundary receiver. He had, I believe it was 9 contested catches on 18 or 19 contested targets, which is a pretty high rate for, first and second year player. So those contested 50-50 balls, even out of high school, that was a strength of his game. So he can still do that traditional 50-50 ball, chuck it up, and just let your guy go make a play. One of the things, and I've mentioned it in passing in this video so far, that's really impressive is the impact or the impression that he made on his teammates at Georgia. Like I said, 2022 was kind of a lost season for him in the sense that it looked like he was bound to be like at least a 700-yard receiver, one of the better weapons, wide receiver in the SEC. Again, unfortunately, injuries took that away, but there's some things that I've heard that they came out of camp the last 2 off seasons, and there was one quote from George Pickens, the former Georgia star receiver, now I believe with the Pittsburgh Steelers, that kind of caught my eye. Pickens talked about this was last offseason, who he felt at Georgia would be kind of their breakout star, the next big thing. That's what I've heard a lot last year that was described for Mitchell. So there's just some things you can't coach. He's got the skills, the mindset, the routes, the speed. He's got it all. So he's probably the next up-and-coming guy. I'm glad he got to see me before I left so he could kind of understand. I'm assuming referring to Pickens' solid last few seasons of production at Georgia. And, AD kind of got to learn the ropes in a sense from one of the best in the last decade at Georgia at the position. But I think that's really impressive. Again, I've mentioned how he was able to just make such a positive impression on the staff, the media, his teammates physically. For a guy that hasn't even crossed the 200-pound mark yet, that really says something about his physical tools. But I digress. One area that I wanted to talk about, before getting into his fit at Texas, is maybe some of the more questionable areas of his game or areas of improvement that I saw during his time at Georgia, from his recruitment, things like that. The first thing that I noticed when kind of breaking down some of the numbers, he did have a pretty high drop rate during his freshman campaign at Georgia. It was like something in the ballpark of 17%. He had a half dozen drops. And for someone that I don't even think had 30 catches on the season, that is a pretty that's a pretty high frequency of drops, or for dropping the ball. And we at Texas just saw some of the receivers having some drop issues. Worthy, JT Sanders, different points of the season. Casey Kane, guys like that. And so I guess the positive news regarding Mitchell is that it seemed like he had cleaned that up. He didn't have any drops this past season. Granted, again, 9 catches, so it wasn't a huge body of work. But, off-season reports, we're talking about, still having that large catch radius, showing off some improved hands. So it sounds like he had mostly solidified that. He was a true freshman, so those kind of freshman jitters or freshman mistakes are bound to happen. So I don't necessarily think that's going to be a huge thing for him, but something to watch. Video is more talking about his fit at Texas, why this just makes sense for Steve Sarkisian and Longhorns and Mitchell in particular. So, the first thing that catches my eye when I think about Mitchell and the potential fit at Texas is just kind of the need of boundary receiver. I've mentioned he's a good fit just as a prototypical standout boundary receiver. You can go get those 50-50 balls in terms of being able to stretch the field, which is integral in Sark's offense. That's something he showed at Georgia. He's got those burners. But again, he's got the route running versatility, large catch radius, large frame, which is something that will help Quinn Ewers. I mentioned it quite a few times on this channel. I'm sure if you watch Texas, you know this. Quinn is someone that just is more natural throwing to bigger body wide receivers, receivers with larger catch radiuses. Think someone like JT Sanders. That's one of the reasons why I was so excited when Texas landed Isaiah Nayor last offseason out of the portal. Unfortunately, he suffered a season-ending knee injury. I think it was in the first or second fall scrimmage of camp, and missed his entire, what would have been his debut season at Texas. But, there's a lot of traits here, physical and just, actual ability on the field that makes him, just on paper, a really nice fit at Texas. Schematically, it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things that Sark asks his different wideouts to do. Even on the boundary, yes, you're still going to be catching those 50-50 balls in the intermediate, sometimes deep passing game, but he likes to do a lot of pre-snap motion. And Mitchell working out of the X slot as much as he did and getting targeted at different parts of the field, working between the numbers sometimes, showing some route versatility, doing some 10-yard curls, some 10, 15-yard outs, and even some goal line routes that just were really technically impressive. That's something that's going to add another layer, another dimension to Sark's offense, and he's just going to have another weapon out there. All of that makes me really excited about this fit. He can definitely make an immediate impact here. Texas needed help in terms of depth in the receiving core. I mentioned Isaiah Nayor suffering that season-ending knee injury, I believe an ACL tear. He's just now in winter workouts getting back into some, I think it's just straight line running drills. It's an ACL tear. You're never going to be 100% sure that someone's going to be able to come back from that. Isaiah Nayor was a fantastic wide receiver of Wyoming his 2 years prior to that unfortunate knee injury. He had a lot of potential in terms of what he could do on the boundary at Texas, but assuming that he's going to come back 100% next fall and be the same guy he was, or potentially even better, is not a safe assumption. So I think that landing someone that can still assume that starting spot on the boundary, it was a key for Texas, and it was clear that they wanted to add 1 or 2 wideouts via the portal. Mitchell seems to be the guy that they've held out for, or at least the type of guy that they've been waiting for. Texas has been really judicious with the portal offers, and Mitchell is, I think, bound to, if he hasn't gotten an offer already, then, we'll definitely be getting one soon. So, for all those reasons, and just, I'd say the way to sum it up well in terms of the depth need is, Texas just needed another playmaker. They're returning their top 3, top 4 receivers from this past season, also top tight end and JT Sanders. You're getting Worthy back, Whittington, Nayor, Kane, at least as we know of now. None of those guys are entering the portal. Be mainly worried about Kane, and I guess it's still possible that Worthy does, but I think most of that speculation is behind us at this point. But yeah, I think that there's a lot there's a lot of unproven talent behind those guys on the depth chart. And while, again, you got guys like Ryan Niblett, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore coming into the mix, Brennan Thompson, Savion Red with another year in the system, I don't know how many of those guys are ready to become day one playmakers yet. And, Texas needs a go-to receiver. Worthy wasn't really that guy last season. And so maybe getting a guy like Mitchell, if he is healthy for the full season, can fit that mold, can be a 1 or a 2 in this offense. Which is something that Texas sorely needs. Need to give viewers a little bit more support to get it done. So, anyway, that's pretty much all I had for this video. Just kind of some initial thoughts on Adonai Mitchell's game, and whether he lands at a place like Texas or USC, or if there's some other favorite schools that end up coming into the mix here in the next couple of days. He's a pretty versatile wide receiver for a guy that's 6'4", and just looks like a true playmaker, and if he could stay healthy, someone that can be a star in 2023. So anyway, for Andrew Miller, Hook 'em Headlines, that's pretty much it. Welcome.